I'm Janet Clark, and you are listening to the Sales Matchmaker Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Sales Matchmaker Podcast. I am your host, Janet Clark, and I have a special guest here with me today. So I have Tobin Slaven. Tobin is my business partner, and he is an expert in marketing. So I know that we talk a lot on this podcast about sales, and I think we all know that you can't have sales without the marketing piece. So Tobin and I have been working together for the last 8 months or so to create a way to marry marketing and sales. And so we've created a program called Sales Map. But today we're going to share with you some of the things that we've both learned in this evolution of building an online coaching business. And one of those things is that most coaches are actually being dim-witted. Now, as we go through this, Tobin's going to talk more about what that means. He coined it and I liked it. So I said, you know what? I think we should go out and share this and help other coaches to really determine if they are being dim-witted, and if they are, what they should know about that and how to fix it. So Tobin, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me on, Janet. And I think I guess I'm enjoying that my earning this seat with you today was because of being dim-witted along the way. So no, I had a couple, when I first used this phrase, I had a couple people say, they didn't take offense, but they said, oh, you shouldn't say negative things about yourself. And honestly, that was never the way it was intended. I came up with this little moniker as a reminder to myself, actually. So the dim, D-I-M of dim-witted, it's not dim-witted in the sense that, most people think, although that is sort of a painful reminder of what happens if you don't pay attention to this. But the D-I-M stands for do it myself. So one thing that we know is that when you go, listen, when you're growing your business, when you're an entrepreneur, you're always going to run into obstacles. That is the life of an entrepreneur. And the entrepreneurs that we see, the business owners that we see that make these leaps ahead are the ones who tap into the expertise. Basically, they tap into someone else who has already faced that obstacle and found a way around it. You know what? I think I can figure this out myself. I'm just going to do it myself. And what ends up happening is we kind of get ourselves in a rut. It might be 2 days or it might be 2 years, but either way, we've saved ourselves a little bit on the front end, meaning, if it was a coach or a service or something that we needed that would have got us there more quickly, we saved that cost. But how much is our time worth? That the only non-renewable resource is time, of course. So if you're slowing down and bogging down your business by being dim-witted, I had to get myself out of that. And of course, we can't buy everything that we want to buy. You and I, Janet, are great buyers of programs. So you have to prioritize and be selective. But when you need help, you should go specifically find someone who's faced that specific obstacle before, that they've actually bridged the gap. They're on the other side of the gap, so to speak, and they can guide you there more quickly.
Yeah, it's a very timely topic. I think that a lot of coaches and consultants that are out there right now have spent a lot of money on various programs, and in some cases, maybe gotten burned with those programs or felt that they were. I always feel like there's a golden thread in everything, and no matter what you've invested, you're going to get it back if you just keep going, and that everything leads you on the path you're supposed to be on. However, I do find that there are a lot of people right now that are a little bit gun shy about going forward and investing in another program because they have these, there has been a lot of we've reached critical mass at this point where just about everybody has been in some program that didn't quite measure up to what they thought it was going to do. And so we tend, by human nature, to want to retreat a little bit and go back to basics. Now, we're going to talk about why we feel that is a good idea in some ways. But as coaches and consultants, what we have to recognize is that if we do it by ourselves without the guidance of somebody else, then we are shooting ourselves in the foot. because we already know by virtue of the fact that we are coaches and consultants that it's important that we should always have one ourselves. So let's kind of go back a little bit before the Dim-Witted, because I think that came second, right? There was a certain thing that
so this has been on my mind lately. So the topic actually came out of, I've been sort of journaling and thinking about lessons that I've been learning. It's always good to step back and reflect. And also I framed it up as lessons that I wish I had learned a little bit sooner. So maybe I had to repeat them a couple times before the lessons actually sunk in. And so Dim-Witted was actually part of a series that I put together recently, and it was part 2. The first part, we focused on the phases or stages of sales and marketing in a business, because I noticed this pattern in myself and then in working with others that a lot of folks are stepping over the earlier stages. So the right information at the wrong time can actually be more damaging in your business. So it's really important to sort of get things in the right order. And so the first part of the series that I built was on the 4 stages.
Yeah. So do you want to share your screen and maybe show that the 4 stages? Because I think that's great, sort of an introduction to the messaging that this podcast is going to have about how to avoid being dim-witted.
Yeah, so I'll real quickly, I'll show folks, these are the 4 parts. And actually there was a 5th part where we did an interview with one of the members of our team where we tied into the lessons he's been learning. But the first part was why I've been feeling overwhelmed in the business. And we talked about, right strategies, but at the wrong time. Second part was the part about being dim-witted. And then we won't get to today, but there's a 3rd and 4th. Getting unstuck and what to do when you're feeling stalled and creating conversations at scale. So this next slide is actually what I used in my presentation. It's the proposed timeline of next steps. This is what people are looking at in their business. And quite often, I mean, Janet, you're in the sales and marketing world. How often do you hear the word funnel or automation? And it seems like everybody wants to skip ahead and jump into phase 4. Which is that one-to-many, the ability to deliver your solution in a one-to-many format. And truthfully, I came from that world. My background was in list building. So I was focused on building big audiences and putting a message out, one message that you could share with many, many different people. But what I learned, I was kind of struggling we had some successes, but we weren't repeating or replicating those successes as easily and as consistently as I thought we should be. So it really sort of made me step back and look at these different phases and realize that the first thing people should be doing, it's called outbound or outreach. And that's where you get into more conversations and with the right people, literally the one-to-one conversations. If your business is anywhere, below a $500,000, even $1 million, you can grow to a 7-figure business just with phase 1 alone. Just going out and talking to people. Some people call this the business development approach or the sales development rep approach. Other folks out there might be familiar with names like Steve Blank is very well known in the startup world. He talks about getting out of the building and talking to your customers. Paul Graham, who was the founder of Y Combinator, also talked about this. He tells his Y Combinator is that accelerator that like Airbnb and Dropbox and some really big unicorn companies came out of, and he was coaching those folks. And he said, look, you've got to do the things that don't scale first, because that's how you really validate your offers, validate your business. You hear the things from your clients or customers that end up making you a much, much better business. So I just see this huge gap of people jumping over phase 1. They don't want to have these conversations. They feel like it's too much work, or maybe they're hiding their marketing, whatever's going on. I was doing the same thing where I was skipping over this. And now we built our whole business around phase 1.
I think this is really interesting, because what I'm finding when I talk with coaches and consultants is that most of them are focused on the phase 4, funnels and automation. And there's a resistance to organic. And I believe that most people did start with organic. They built their business, and that typically in any high ticket coaching program that you go into where they're helping you to develop your high ticket program and sell it, they're going to recommend organic. But then they're going to jump way into now automate the whole thing and, make a funnel and do Facebook ads. And what has happened is that people have said organic is too much work. It's too much, trouble. And they're going after this shiny object of, I'm going to go do this automation. So we have figured out that there is a way to actually take your organic and to actually scale organic, right? This outbound. And that when you focus on outbound first, and like you said, maybe even get your business to 7 figures doing that. And that's where we want to focus today, is how to do that, and then how to not be dim-witted about the outbound part of it, right? That it doesn't have to just be you doing it yourself. And, the money that people are spending to do all these Facebook ads and to automate these funnels and to hire all these people to manage all of that could be much better spent back in phase 1. So let's kind of go there and share a little bit about what you've learned and how we can scale that part.
Yeah, well, I think that the timeline here, you use the word organic. So relative to this timeline in the 4 phases that folks are seeing, paid traffic, you have organic or paid traffic. And organic does include this outbound or outreach, this conversational method that we're referencing right now. But organic can also be inbound marketing, which is also called content or attraction marketing, where you, for example, do a podcast like this one, or you write a blog post. People see that thought leadership, and then they come to you and they're essentially indoctrinated in your way of seeing the world. So that's phase 2. Phase 3 is where you start to strike up collaborations with other folks that are already talking to, they're already building an audience of the people who would be ideal clients for you. So phases 1, 2, and 3 are all organic. They all fall under the umbrella, but they're different nuances of that organic. So phase 1 is really the one-to-one. Phase 2 is where you start to put the content out. And listen, I've been an inbound marketing agency. I actually ran one. I was a HubSpot reseller. I love the concept and the value of inbound marketing. To me, it's just a matter of order, getting things in the right order. Because what a lot of people don't realize is, so I'll use HubSpot as an example. Janet, I know you're familiar with them as well from your days up in Boston. HubSpot is the company that coined that term, inbound marketing. They literally wrote the book on inbound marketing, but they grew their business and ended up getting a big amount of venture capital from Google by using their outbound sales team. The outbound sales team grew that business, right? Inbound marketing is great, but it's not exactly predictable. You don't know when the inbound leads are going to show up. You just put a lot of seeds in the ground. You put a lot of hooks in the water, whatever analogy people want to use. You get a lot of stuff out there, and little by little, they start to bring these qualified people to you who have sort of been brought up to speed, and they're in your sphere of influence, but it's not reliable. It's not bankable. And here's the interesting thing. When you put the outbound first, the outreach or conversational method that we're talking about first, not only do you learn faster and you dial your business in more quickly, you get an aligned business, but then your inbound or your content marketing works better too. Because every time you talk with someone, you reach out to them and create a conversation with them, the first thing that they do is they're like, oh, well, who's Janet? Like, what is she in this sales and marketing world? So they go and check you out. They find this podcast. They find what you're doing. Like, they see the footprints that you've left on the web of who you are, what you believe, and they figure out where they fit in your world. So now your inbound marketing is being amplified by putting it in the right order. And the same thing happens in phase 3 with these strategic partnerships with people who are already talking to your ideal customers. If you've done and put the right pieces in place of phase 1 first, then phase 2, now you're really valuable to people in phase 3. Whereas if you just try to jump ahead, there are some programs out there that will teach you just go directly to the strategic partnerships. I'll be honest with you. I've seen people doing this and it's falling flat because they don't come to the table with enough to make themselves valuable to their strategic partners. And then the last phase, the funnels or the automation, which often relies on a paid traffic component, whether it's Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, Google AdWords, whatever you're doing. It's wonderful to say, well, I'm just going to pay this money. I'll spend $1,000 and it's going to bring back $2,000 of revenue. But the truth is 80% of those funnels, those automated funnels, they're not producing the ROI for a number of reasons, because it takes a while to dial them in. And a lot of people never get to that point. They get frustrated. They lose a lot of money along the way. And here's the worst part, Janet. They're actually ruining reputations because they weren't dialed in. The people who saw those ads or received that automation sequence, it wasn't a great experience for them. So their first impression of you and your business was, yeah, this person doesn't care about me as a person. They're just dumping, an offer or a pitch on me. And so you ruin your reputation with that person. They're never going to do business with you. Whereas if you dial all the way back to phase one and you just reach out and you talk to people in a genuine, real, like tap them on the shoulder, the same way you would if they were standing in front of you in line for coffee. You tap them on the shoulder, you ask them about their world, what's going on. Maybe you compliment something that's going on in their world that you admire about them. You create a real conversation and the magic happens.
Yep, I love it. And we learned that the hard way. So
yes. This is the benefit of many hard lessons and a lot of dollars lost along the way.
Exactly. Okay, so let's go back to talking about this outbound. And so you have started out with a program called Conversations at Scale. And I obviously had the High Ticket Sales Accelerator program and the High Ticket Sales Alliance. So I have the salespeople and the matching, right, for the coaches and the consultants, hence the Sales Matchmaker. But what I was finding was that a lot of the coaches and consultants did not have qualified leads for the salespeople to come in. Now, in looking back over my experience in sales, particularly coming out of the corporate world as a very high-level sales trainer, manager, salesperson, I recognize that there's a part of selling that we were sort of, not like we were just overlooking in this high-ticket selling, which is really the salespeople doing that relationship building, that prospecting piece of the sales process that makes them truly a consultative salesperson, a trusted advisor to that individual that they are selling to, which elevates their status so much more during the sales conversation. And it wasn't until you and I started put our heads together and saying, oh, boy, what if we could take Conversations at Scale and merge it? So we now have this kind of lead flow process happening, and then be able to bring salespeople in to work with the coach or consultant to actually spread, get out of the do-it-yourself mode, right? And accelerate what's happening out there. So talk a little bit about how we did that.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is, a lot of businesses, there's always that friction between sales and marketing. So if the sales are not happening, they're not converting, the salespeople are going to point at the marketing side and say the leads are coming in, they're unqualified. This is just not working. And vice versa. The marketing people are going to say, look, we're producing leads here. What's going on the conversion side? It's always a finger pointing kind of approach. So I think that's one thing that we're talking about here, this sort of holistic sales and marketing where the qualification is happening on the marketing side in these conversations. So they come in and now you've really dialed in your sales process as well. The other thing I think is going back to this concept of dim-witted is, listen, I'm one of those people. I'm just smart enough that I tackle a lot of things myself. I try to learn. I actually enjoy the learning of being in the online space and reading a lot and learning new tools. I'm constantly testing and trying new digital tools. But I have to be careful. This is that lesson learned about trying to do everything myself and thinking that I have all the answers. Because the truth is, all of us together are smarter than any single one of us. And when you get in that do-it-myself mode, you miss out on some of the biggest lessons and the biggest leaps forward. And an example of this, Janet, because we've been working with a coach, you and I together, that he runs a program that's not dissimilar from what we do, at least in this sort of outbound approach. He does it in a slightly different way and at a very high level. And when we paid for coaching, essentially paying to work with a coach who does something very similar to us, we've raised our game so much and in so many different ways to see the nuances of how he does things compared to what we were doing. It's just been off the charts. It was one of the best decisions we ever made. And we were able to make that big leap forward. And I think that, there's a couple things here. One, don't be dim-witted. Two, yes, there's a little bit of work here. You've got to roll up your sleeves and have these conversations with people, because that's what really progresses your business, is having these one-to-one conversations where people say, yeah, I like this. What you told me is kind of cool, but what I really like is this other thing that you kind of didn't emphasize as much. And the first time you hear that, maybe it's just an outlier, but the second and third time you hear that, you're now learning something about your business that you would never have known otherwise. You couldn't read that label from inside the bottle, right? But once you hear that, now you can actually start to bring in the salespeople. You can build a sales team around you, and that's where these conversations scale. And like I said, there are big companies. This outbound approach or outreach method does not mean small business. It's the most direct, most simple, most elegant approach to get business. That's why people should be starting here. But there are big companies that have taken millions of dollars of venture capital, and they're on the hook to produce big results, and they're growing their business by using these sales development reps or SDRs.
Yeah, and I think the thing that is so amazing and exciting for us is that I look back at when I built my first company, which was a B2B sales agency in the technology telecom space. I had to do all of this outbound through getting dressed and driving to networking events and going early in the morning to breakfast meetings and later in the evening, to the cocktail things and, it's all kinds of events. And, there's something to be said for doing some face-to-face, but the beautiful thing now is that LinkedIn is the perfect place to do that without having to spend all day out there doing it, right? Or to devote hours to having to do it. And that's how LinkedIn was designed. It is a business networking platform. And when it's used right, which most people are not, we discovered, but when you do it correctly, it's a gold mine.
Yeah, 100%. So LinkedIn is definitely, this outbound approach works on anywhere where you can converse with people. But the advantage of LinkedIn and why it's such a focus for so many people these days is there's a value of how much you can learn about the other person that informs that conversation. So if you go, this happened to me recently where I connected with someone on Facebook first. They asked to be friends and they were asking questions about our program on Facebook, but I had no idea who they were, what business they were in, a lot of people that sort of, Facebook is not set up as a business first platform. So that information was hidden. But once I found them on LinkedIn, I got all the background I needed. We ended up having a great first conversation. So you don't always connect or find people on LinkedIn, but you can enhance the conversations there. It's really the number one B2B or a business oriented platform out there.
Yeah, I'll call it B2E, B to entrepreneur or business owner, right? So I like to differentiate. The B2B sometimes to me is when you're selling into a company where somebody's spending their company budget. Whereas the B2E is more like you're speaking with the business owner or entrepreneur who's actually spending their own money for transformation. And it's a different type, which is where my heart flow conversation can really work great. But I've had other top episodes where I've talked about heart flow. So I want to kind of wrap this up. So here's the things that we've learned that are really important for, I think, all of the listeners out there. One is that if you are struggling right now with ads, you're struggling with the funnel, you're buried in the technology, and you're talking to unqualified people all the time because your calendar is getting filled up with the wrong leads, then you're probably way far into the fourth stage when you should be going back to basics, which is go and work through creating a really effective outbound strategy And a lot of people know that I sell for the ask method. They know of Ryan Levac and, how amazing he is. But the key here is ask. And there's different ways that you can do it. And you can do it through building funnels and surveys and all of that. But one other way that you can do it is direct outreach to people who are your target ideal client. So that's what we have found is actually the quickest way to accelerate sales of high ticket offers is to literally go out and have these conversations with people.
Yeah. And I would just emphasize with folks, because you mentioned this before, Janet, of what other people are trying to do on LinkedIn. We're human beings. We're used to conversing with others. And the truth test here is, if you wouldn't say your salesy, spammy, leg humper kind of message to someone in real life, if you wouldn't walk up to them, like if you couldn't say those words without kind of choking on them because they're that salesy, don't try to dump that on someone online. It doesn't make sense, right? Converse with people. The best way to converse online is it's a mirror of what we do in real life.
Exactly. So then now let's talk a little bit as we're wrapping up here about how to scale this. So we've figured out how we can actually match up a professional level salesperson who is an SDR more or less, so that sales development rep who can also be the person who will come in and do the final enrollment in the sales call as well. So when somebody is actually got somebody doing that in conjunction with them and they're doing it together, how that will really accelerate their ability to grow their business and eventually step out of that role of having to do it themselves.
Yeah. So I think you and I are a good example of this, Janet, because we do work in a partnership, but essentially your SDR is a part of your team. And when I reach out to and talk with folks, there are things that I can say about Janet that Janet can never say about herself. I can talk about her background with Ryan Levesque or closing 100K deals with Alex Mendosian. There are things that, this is the value of scaling up with a team and covering essentially more ground. I mean, you can do, like I said, big numbers, $500,000, $1 million with this one-to-one. Big companies are using this approach, but when they want to scale, when they have to, basically do hundreds of millions of dollars, they just put a team around it. And there's a lot of expert-based businesses out there. These experts are not experts in sales and marketing per se. They're experts in their topic, whatever that is. They're coaching the transformations that they bring to people. So putting this team around them and letting them talk about what they do best and letting the team essentially beat the bushes and find the folks who are the best fit for that transformation and bring them into that conversation. It's really it's a fun play area is the way I look at it. It's a game.
So we call it Sales Map, and it's really MAP stands for the Sales Momentum Accelerator Program. So it's really a way for coaches to kind of get back to basics, start focusing on getting more information from their ideal prospects, being able to bring a salesperson on board at the same time that they're generating revenue for their business and getting all of this great information. So I think, that's a big message, is that if you're feeling overwhelmed with the technology, the funnel and all of that, it's okay. There is another way, even though some people out there would tell you there isn't. We're living proof that there is. And then the second thing really is that no matter what you're doing in your business, no matter how good you think you are at it, just like Tobin and I, where we feel like, okay, we've got a great process for lead generation, we have a great process for sales, and then we end up hiring a coach who actually has been doing this process for longer than we have, and finding out that the validation alone from working with a coach was skyrocketing our confidence and our conviction in our process. And of course, there's always more you can learn. There's never going to be that point where you know it all. So when you get with somebody who's ahead of you in the game, you are going to, you can't help but learn and be better and grow from the experience. And we've already got a significant ROI ourselves from that level of investment.
So there's real magic in doing the same work, doing the work with others who are doing the same work, like all doing it together. And high performers have coaches. I mean, it's as simple as that.
And when you collaborate with people who don't see you as a threat to them, even though you may be doing something similar, but where everybody comes together in collaboration, that is where the magic happens. There's more business out there that we can ever all handle. And when we can really come together and support one another, that's where, our one of our mentors, Nick Peterson, will say, the rising tide raises all the ships. And I think it's a great saying and something for everybody to, take to heart. All right. Well, that's a wrap for another episode of the Sales Matchmaker. Thank you, Tobin, for taking some time to share your insights with us today. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode of the Sales Matchmaker. In the meantime, I am always open to chatting. So feel free to reach out to me at janet@thefreedomshift.com or Tobin at tobinslaven.com. And let us know where your head's at. And if there's anything we can help you with, we're always happy to do it.
Thanks, Janet.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Sales Matchmaker Podcast. To hear more episodes, visit us at www.thesalesmatchmaker.com.